Hello and welcome to the new episode of EBEA Consulting podcast with Miquel Alimbau-Comas, Principal Lecturer in Aviation at Haaga-Helia University in Finland. Taking into account Miquel's extensive knowledge on the subject of customer experience, we will talk about its importance in business context as well as COVID-19 impacts on passenger experience driven by new sanitary requirements. We will then move on to discuss academical implications for professional career and how academic environment contributes to the improvement of the aviation industry. Hello, Miquel, and thank you very much for joining us for today's episode of EBEA Consulting Podcast.
Hi, Hubert. It's a pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Can you please tell us a little bit about yourself, your career, and your relation to the aviation industry?
Certainly. So, my name is Miquel Alimbau-Comas, and I currently serve as the principal lecturer in aviation at Haaga-Helia University, based in Finland. And I've been related to the aviation for quite a number of years now. It's been over 15 years that I've been in the industry, between the aviation and the tourism industry. And it all started, I can go back to the childhood, right? And tell you a little bit about how did I become such an enthusiast and ended up even working in the field.
Absolutely.
So I remember that I was actually flying to Canary Islands on a holiday with my parents. And at that time, there was no in-flight entertainment other than, try to do a little bit of seeing through the window and then seeing how, what the people were doing and reading the in-flight magazine. So at the time, I picked the in-flight magazine, and I remember having spent the 3+ hours that the flight lasted checking on the different type of planes that they were on Iberia's fleet, whether they were faster, how many passengers were carrying, what was the range. So it all started that way. So at the time of making the choice of what should I study, I decided to go for aeronautical engineering, then moved a little bit into, let's say, higher aims and went on to aerospace engineering. And by the time I finished, I saw that my mind was a little bit, let's say, inflexible, right? So engineering makes you really believe that 2 + 2 = 4 all the time. And in business, we know that even you have the magical ingredients, maybe the recipe and the final outcome will not be what you expected. So I decided to study an MBA, then do a PhD. And that was a little bit about my education background. And this obviously has helped me on my academic now career. And regarding my professional experience, I actually started working for a GSA called Service Air. That was at Barcelona Airport. And it was a wonderful experience. I was still studying at the time, so I was combining part-time work with my studies. And I got a lot of experience, then got the opportunity to continue growing and was employed at Turkish Airlines, where I worked for about 6+ years, and developed a lot of different roles in there. So from taking care of the operations to marketing and sales, commercial, sponsorships, network and development planning within the country. So there was quite a lot of different angles for that time that I was with Turkish Airlines. Then I went abroad and wanted to have a little bit of experience beyond my zone of comfort or comfort zone. So ended up in Kenya and Tanzania, mostly related to tourism, but as well taking care of a fleet of Cessnas, private jets in this case. From there, I came back to Europe and been a teacher at different universities, up to 5 different universities, but mostly with Haaga-Helia currently. So that's my current situation.
Perfect. That's an amazing story and quite a journey, really. It's always interesting to see, and that's why I like asking this question, how it all started, because some of us, they were like, dreaming as a child of becoming a pilot one day, and then depending on the life paths and which sort of direction they took them, they ended somehow related to aviation in one way or another. Some other people, like myself, for example, not necessarily going as far back as childhood, but more like probably more opportunistic and pragmatic approach. Like, what would be the industry that I can see myself fit and would really like to pursue my career in. But moving on to your current role, if you could tell us a little bit what it entails and what it is about.
Certainly. So the role of the principal lecturer and how it is seen within my current employer, it encompasses a little bit of teaching within the let's say the advanced modules of the bachelor's or the master's in the aviation business programs. And at the same time, one of my duties as well is researching. So I take part in different research projects that we currently have, as well as the development of certain other projects that the university has already started. So as a researcher, some of the interest that I have is regarding business models, especially aviation companies, and how do they maintain sustainability in long term. And I don't necessarily mean only the environmental sustainability, but also how to remain profitable and how to remain true to your objectives and values as the time goes by.
Absolutely.
This is part of my interest. I have several other interests, but mainly this one. Then when it comes to the projects that we are developing, one of the projects that we are currently starting, so we just initiated it quite recently, is regarding the electric aviation or the future of aviation, but seeing from let's say a more sustainable, environmentally sustainable approach. And we believe that one of the opportunities is actually the electric aviation. So contributing into that from the angle of seeing how the different stakeholders in the industry need to adapt once the technology is readily available. So, for instance, if we just to bring it to the a practical example, one could argue that we could use an electric aircraft and nothing changes. Well, in fact, you need to argue with the customers and try to involve them in the discussion. Would you fly an electric aircraft? Are they ready for that? Are they willing to? And what does it entail? For instance, would you be happy that for a 40-minute flight, given the current constraints of the technology, would you be happy to spend 2 hours in the airport for a 40 minutes flight? So how does the customer journey need to change and develop in order to be able to foster such change in the industry, such evolution? What do we need for an airport to be able to cater for such aircrafts? How do the roles of the airlines will change? Will the airlines keep on the more traditional point-to-point or hub and spoke? Will we be talking about more commuting approach of airline model, or who is the right carrier to make use of those aircrafts?
Perfect. Let me pause you here, because telling us about the electric aircraft, you are touching on points from something that I already wanted to ask you about, and it's like combining both, so customer experience and the passenger journey, which is one thing, and then the whole aspect of research and the electric aircraft. I think it will be a really good point to get back to it later during our conversation, and it will be a perfect way to wrap up and also enable you to tell us how it is all combined within, for example, a framework like this. So, given the fact that you have written your PhD dissertation around customer experience, I would say let's talk about it a little bit. Could you please tell us why is it important in a business context?
Well, the customer experience, it's becoming more and more relevant these days, especially because we have been applying more like a cookie cutter approach to any single business, right? So I have a product or I have a service, and then I expect that most of the clients will actually purchase it as is. And obviously, if we think from a business administration approach, that makes sense if you are thinking on economies of scale. So you're trying to maximize the profits, right? But the element is that as the clients, they have more and more access to all these different possibilities. And I mean, for instance, flying, they get exposed to different ways of organizing the airports. They get exposed to different, let's say, strategies of the airlines on how to treat the customers. They get exposed to different ground handling agent approaches, and this is becoming less of a cookie cutter. So, and if we think about the digitalization of the industry and all the processes, this is the greatest opportunity. So from turning into this, I like to give the example of Ford, right? That he was saying everyone can choose the color of his Ford car as long as they choose it black. Mm-hmm. So, we evolve from this model in which there's only one single option into how would you shape your own journey? And the way that this can be done is obviously knowing the customers better. We do have nowadays big data. We collect every single information from the customers' mobile phones, for instance, their interaction while they're surfing the websites, and so on and so forth. So the matter is how we can make use of all these fourth industrial revolution technologies. So from the big data to artificial intelligence or machine learning parts of it, Internet of the Things mainly, to better serve the customer. Now, if I ask you, Hubert, for instance, does your boarding card change from the moment that you leave your home to the moment that you get to your destination? Or is it still the same boarding pass? The situation is that you get the same boarding pass, right? So that nothing changes. The information remains static. So why am I interested to have information in my digital boarding pass, for instance, about what is my gate while I'm still at home or I'm just leaving home? Perhaps what I want to know is what is the terminal, which is the concourse, which are the check-in desks, provided I have to check in something, right? I have any luggage to check in. Correct. But then once I clear security, why am I interested in that information? I'm not interested any longer. I want to be told where is my boarding gate, where is the lounge in case that I have access to it. So the idea is that by making adaptive tools, digital tools, we can better cater for the needs of the different clients. Mm-hmm. And now let me make it a little bit more complex. How do we now cater for instance, PRMs, passengers that have reduced mobility? So we can still make use of all this to enhance the customer experience. So basically, enhance the customer experience by allowing individualized or personalized customer journey.
Absolutely. I think this is one of the stronger, or if not the strongest, trends on how to make an individual customized journey for each passenger, so that they can control the amount of, for example, interaction with staff or airport processes. And I know that in the long term, but maybe it's gonna be, become available quicker than we expect, the walk-through security experience. But whether you want to speak to people or just rely on the kiosk and automated solutions infrastructure, now also what is driven by the pandemic, we can see that you can use your own smartphone as a kiosk. You don't really have to touch any of the displays. You just scan the QR code and then proceed from the comfort of your own phone. So it's really interesting to observe how it is all evolving. We know where it is going, but also the pace of change and the opportunities, it's quite fascinating. So thank you for your insights on that one. And I think another very relevant and interesting aspect will be the COVID-19 impacts on passenger experience. So how the sanitary requirements, they drive change in this one. This is something that we actually collaborated on when we are looking into the operational impacts of physical distancing. So it will be also great to hear how you perceive the changes in passenger experience coming from that.
Well, I have been suffering, obviously, the current situation, and I have been analyzing what could be done, right? So trying to see it from the maximum empathy for everyone, for the airlines, for the airport management, and so on and so forth, because it's really challenging situation where each country has different regulations. There doesn't seem to be, let's say, a red thread that makes all the airports operate in the same way, all the airlines operate in the same way. Mm-hmm. So it's becoming really hard, right? And we've moved from, I can relate to it when in May I was able to fly. The first week that the flights resumed within Europe, I was, let's say, mainly flight resuming. Not maybe there were some flights operating between certain countries, but I was able to fly between Finland and Barcelona. What I observed is that all of a sudden everything was closed, right? So there's no customer experience any longer. There's a waiting spot at the airport that you just wait for the time to board, and then you just get on the flight, minimum service. So obviously it's a very hard situation, and this can represent a huge disruption for the customer because we've seen now this increase in distance between the passengers. Sometimes the lines get longer, processing times are increasing, and at the same time you are being requested not to come earlier than the check-in time starts. It's really hard, but I think that the main element would be what could we do so that the passengers are checked before even arriving at the airport, so that then the experience goes back to normal within the possible or the possibilities that we may have. But if you have a client that or a passenger that is already checked before the let's say journey step called airport, then life becomes easier in that sense. Nowadays, there's some countries that request a PCR before boarding a flight towards that country. Others don't. And this obviously creates a sense of lack of safety. You don't know if the person who is next to you is carrying the virus or not, just in the same way that it would be in any other situation or location, with the difference that you will be exposed to that person for the duration of your flight.
Correct.
So the easiest way to actually go back to normal would be, let's try to make sure that whoever comes into an airport has the test. So rather than requesting the information on destination, couldn't it be done on the origin? And then as well, reaching certain level of uniformity across the different countries. At least that's one of the things that could be expected within Europe, right? That there's a bit of commonality on that. We have certain expectations. We've heard about the IATA developing this vaccination passport that should allow or enable the airlines to have an easier, let's say, checking process to be able to assess whether the person has the vaccines or not, and whether they have tested. I'm not really sure if that would be the case as well, but they have test results on that passport. But at least there is some progress on that sense. We could elaborate and argue about the impacts, but well, there's this wonderful study that was conducted, and I was lucky to be part of it, where we analyzed which were the different, let's say, initiatives that other airports worldwide were taking to mitigate the impacts of COVID. And obviously, EBEA, in this case, your colleagues and yourself, you did an amazing job in trying to make the simulation, or actually successfully achieving the simulation on what were the impacts and what would be the throughputs for that. So I think that we don't argue any longer about the impact. So the challenge would be, how can we go back to normality, even if COVID still exists, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and how that potentially new normality will look like as well. Because like you said, there is still a lot of uncertainties, a lot of unknowns, and the general lack of standardization and uniformity in terms of operational guidance, for example, it doesn't really help. And I think it's also a little bit disappointing, especially nearly 1 year into the pandemic. So I think that the government should be also stepping up their game to push for those initiatives that are being discussed. Let's face it, we have been doing that, and also I think contributing to the industry recovery ourselves. And there have been a number of other great studies and initiatives, all of them oriented at helping aviation industry, which has taken a really heavy toll on this one.
But at the same time, I would say that probably we're going to be fast forwarding all these sustainable aviation initiatives. So meanwhile, the aviation is on hold because of the COVID situation. So low amount of passengers, barely making it to break even for those that can even reach break even. it gives us the opportunity to pause and think of how the aviation should be after all these passes. And I've seen, because I thanks to this research project I was explaining, I have more exposure to that. I see there's a lot of enthusiasm, and there's many different policymakers that are fostering these investigations and research about what can be done to make aviation more sustainable. So yes, it's quite negative in terms of the impact in the industry, and especially if we think about all this manpower that has been lost, unfortunately, that people has been on unpaid leaves and has been retrenched due to the lack of, let's say, demand. But at the same time, I'm quite hopeful that when the solution has been found on how to enable aviation to reestablish again and restart again in its full force, I'm really hopeful that we will see quite a number of remarkable changes as well.
That's very useful, and definitely there is a silver lining to it. And like you said, among all that negativity and difficulties and challenges as well, it also gives you this opportunity to maybe look differently at old ways of doing things and coming up with better ones, or sort of being forced to change as well. It can be a good thing if done right, most definitely. Thank you all for listening to the first part of our today's conversation. We hope to see you next week when we continue our discussion and talk about university engagement with aviation professionals and other businesses, as well as some insights into academic research, among others, electric aviation.